I'm Darlene Washington, and this is Spiritually Intriguing, the Church Edition, on RazzmatazzTV.com. Today we have Reverend Dr. Walter B. Johnson, Jr. of Greater Institutional AME Church. Reverend?
Pleasure, Miss Washington.
Same here.
Yes, ma'am.
Today we're going to be asking you a series of questions about what's going on in today's society. It's important for us to get, I think, a spiritual guidance from a religious source versus people just constantly taking on the spiritual opinions of outsiders. So this is just a way of providing that sort of information to the public.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I'd like for you to do is tell us about your pastoral journey.
Sure. First and foremost, again, to your viewership, thank you for the opportunity of sharing and expressing. My name is Reverend Dr. Walter B. Johnson, Jr., pastor of Greater Institutional AME Church. This is now my 5th year as pastor here. My journey started actually back when I was probably around 11 years of age, in 6th grade. In the 60s, I was very much impressed, probably reflected upon the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X.
One of my favorites.
And they impressed upon us in terms of leadership. Learned early on about the statement of W.B. Du Bois in terms of those who are the talented TIF are supposed to reach back and help out in communities. So having said that, 11 years of age, I began public speaking over in Inglewood at my elementary school.
Wow.
I had participated in a Black History Month event where I was supposed to portray Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I still have the robe that my mother made for me back in the 6th grade, which was like over 50-something years
That is
now.
so sweet.
40-something years. And so having done that, grew up in Inglewood, went to high school, went to Chicago State, went to Chicago Theological Seminary, got my bachelor's from Chicago State, Master of Divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary, and an earned doctorate from Chicago Theological Seminary. Began my actual pastoral and ministerial career at 16 years of age.
Wow.
As being one of the youngest ever being licensed to preach in the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Chicago. And then at the age of 19, I was ordained an itinerant deacon. And then at the age of 21, I was ordained an itinerant elder. And at the age of 22, I began my pastoral career. So I've actually been in pastoral ministry over 35 years now.
Oh, that
Yes,
is
ma'am.
so impressive.
Well, thank you.
God.
Thank you.
Wow, I just love it. I'm
Yes.
so impressed.
Thank
Okay, well, I guess we'll get started with the questions
Sure.
then. One of the questions is, in today's society, there seems to be a need for immediate access to mental health counseling.
Yes, ma'am.
I say this because if you look at all the random shootings
Yes.
at schools and other venues, even the age of these individuals vary from teens to, I believe, like the mid-30s.
Mm-hmm.
Is it mental health counseling that these people need, or are they like a new breed of American terrorists in our own society? What do you think?
I do think we had Dr. Carl Bell here at our church a couple of years ago, a noted psychologist, mental health professional, who shared with our congregation that young persons' formative years are the most critical years. And the sad part about it is a lot of our young African American males may not have access to positive role models, nor maybe access to maybe assistance and support growing up in those early maturational years, and as a result of that have gotten engaged with peers and others, and unfortunately have gotten engaged in what I would call antisocial behavior.
Okay.
And so at the end of the day, the bottom line, yes, there is a need. It's interestingly enough, in this society and time, we are cutting those very vital services, meaning mental health services, education, all the other things that are important for people to be able to grow and to be successful in society. And on the flip side of that, with the young lady who came out with the book, The New Jim Crow, where there's now a surge, a burgeoning surge of penal institutions cropping up. So on the one hand, you have institutions that are closing, traditional institutions, educational institutions, social service entities that are working with young people who are now closing. And then on the flip side of it, you have more prisons being built, jail cells being built. Listen to one of the state legislators a few months ago who talked about that at the age probably around 3rd grade, which is 6, 7, 8 years of age, they already know based upon the population, whether it's in Chicago, any urban setting, that more than likely how many young persons ultimately are going to end up in the criminal justice system. And as a pastor, one of the challenges for me is making sure that those young persons don't. And so I try to provide a kind of positive reinforcement in terms of what I do as a pastor. I also early on in my life was, like I said, indelibly impacted by Dr. Martin Luther King, but also as well as other African American males, whether it's my father, whether other males in the community. And so when I was in my seminary training, I actually did a doctoral thesis where I proposed that the black community, the faith community in specific, needed to wrap its arms around our young people. And as a result of that, I began a program back in 1997, because I formerly pastored in Cabrini Green.
Wow.
And so at Wayman AME Church, there was a lot of shootings, killings going on.
That was great.
Right, and what happened was a young man by the name of Dantrell Davis was on his way to school over in Cabrini to General Elementary School, got shot and killed by a sniper, a gangbanger, whatever. And then there was Girl X back in the day, in 1990s, that was raped and molested in the building right behind the church. And so as a result of that, we organized some faith leaders in the North Ministry Alliance to address some of the ills and the concerns and issues in terms of safe passage, of which now, 16 years later, the program, along with me being a pastor of a church, Alliance for Community Peace, where we're also doing safe passage with Chicago Public Schools.
Okay. And so that relates to the teen shootings and
Yes.
the need for access to the mental health, and the fact that there are more prisons sprouting up than mental health access being provided.
Yes, ma'am.
Wow, that's very interesting. And plus, that was quite a journey to have done that.
Yes, thank you.
There are statistics presented in the media by Huffington Post and Fox News that acknowledge teen pregnancy as a declining problem. The highest rate is in New Mexico and the lowest rate is in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Do you agree with those stats, or would you say that it should be based more on race than by overall teen rates in regions?
Well, I think based on what you said and citing those particular institutions or places, it depends on who's not only doing the statistical analysis and evaluations, but also as to whether or not it is race-based or ethnicity-based. The challenges in the black community, we know there has been challenges in terms of, teenage pregnancies, etc. And the problem is that it's not always been addressed. And then we also talk about, back in the day, we don't use this term too much, but effective black parenting. So you have young people who are having babies who are already babies. And then you have those persons back in the day, so to speak, going through effective parenting classes, but that's not being offered. So what happens? These young people are out there and don't have the supportive systems in place to be able to manage, even if they get pregnant, or even we used to deal and address the whole thing with the female, but what about the male in terms of being responsible and not having access to persons that they can talk to also understand and know what it means, not only the creation of a baby, but also being able to provide for that baby as a male and to be an important figure in that child's life as they grow and mature.
Right, I agree. So it seems like we still have a whole lot of work to do. But with birth control being more accessible and the education of how to use it, and I think teens are a little more responsible these days, and unfortunately they probably shouldn't be engaging in those activities as early as they are now, but I don't know what we can do to fix that, but more so focus on just the prevention as well as the education and the moral stability of those types of decisions.
Statistically, and I've had some information and background on this, is that a lot of those type of programs, when they come in and they say, based upon the moral compass that children ought not be engaged in that kind of activity, the unfortunate part, they are. And so we have to find a different stratagem or way to be able to approach that and address that with our young people. The church has an active, engaged role, or should be actively engaged in doing that kind of thing. You know, back in the day, so to speak, and I say back in the day because I'm middle-aged, and I tell people all the time I got my AARP card, so I'm okay with that. But back in the day, what would happen is that young people, particularly females, would be brought in the church and then, so to speak, brought before persons to indicate that she is pregnant and ask for the forgiveness of the saints and the elders and the mothers of the church, as opposed to simply, you know, providing some support and nurture, meaning the mothers of the church would not have had to bring somebody publicly, but work with them privately. Because today's time is that young people are not as open to even coming to church. Unlike when we grew up or whatever the case may be, young people are not coming to church. And so we have a situation where, yes, some are, but a vast majority are not. If that was the case, then we'd be able to address teenage pregnancy. We'll be able to address the violence. I meet young people all the time, and as best as I can, you know, the church has to go out and be accessible out into the community. In other words, like this past weekend, we had an event called God's on the Block, where I shared with persons that we have a mandate from God that we cannot be residing within the four walls of this building, but we got to go out there into the community and reach our young people and reach those who are golden ages and reach those other individuals who are not coming into the church, because at the end of the day, okay, the church is here. And I kind of even gave an analogy a few weeks ago in a sermon where I said, you know, for some folk, the church is more or less like a museum. What do you do in a museum? You go and you observe, you look at things, and that's the extent of it. For us as a church, we need to be into discipling, which means that's an active, proactive, engaged role to go out into the community, let people know who we are. I don't have to be around, walking around with a suit and tie and all that other good stuff. That doesn't matter. What does matter is that, as I say sometimes, they'll know that we are Christians by our love. So what are we emulating? What are we exempling to the broader community in terms of what it's all about to be a child of God?
Oh, I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. This is a sidebar question. It just came to me. Well, how do you feel about those teen mom programs? Are they helping or hurting?
Measuring those, I'm not really sure, because obviously young people are still engaging in premarital sex. I think the focus was at one point on the females. I know that with the federal government, they have this National Fatherhood Initiative that they are trying to engage young men in the process. So it's not just focused on females, but also focused on the male aspect and making sure that the males understand they have a role and responsibility, like I said earlier, in terms of nurturing and being a part of that young child's life. And so again, not sure how those programs work. I think at the end of the day, for me as a father, I want an example not just for males, but I want an example for females, because I find, even and I talk about it all the time from the pulpit, is that it's not just about the males, but it's about a male having a positive influence in a female's life. I have two grown daughters now, and as they were growing up, I used to tell them, this is how a man is supposed to treat you. A man is supposed to pull out the chair. A man is supposed to open the door. A man is supposed to walk on the outside. They did not know that initially.
And our girls need to hear that.
And they need to know that. And I tell people also, young ladies, a man does not have to call you a B or H. That's not a term of endearment. It's a derogatory, denigrating term. And for me, you know, to find a male calling a woman out of her name, I would have never, ultimately that's somebody's mother. And if you respect your mother, you have to respect that female too. So it's not just dealing with the male, it's also that the male has a presence in the life of that female, whether it's a father or another man. And I've tried to, as a pastor, show both sides of the equation so that young people understand and know that there's a part to play for males, but also a part to play for females as well.
I appreciate that. Well, that's just wonderful insight into some secular issues that are taking place right now. My hope is to have people view these shows and take into consideration the spiritual and moral content of where we're coming from. So I thank you for your time, and that'll do it for this edition of Spiritually Intriguing, the Church Edition. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.